What's up, guys? MaksWerks here, and we're ready to start a new project. This is a 2000 Yamaha R1, which makes it a bit of a unicorn because it is entirely stock. I forgot to turn on the camera and actually just jumped right into it. So the battery's already out, the fairing's already up in the corner. And so this bike sat for a while, so it's going to need some love. I pulled the battery out of here, and it is by far the deadest battery. I had it on the charger for 48 hours at 6 amps, and I could barely get the battery to register 3 volts. So it's going into the graveyard. It's going to need a new battery. I'm gonna go through and clean everything a little bit. It's been sitting in a shed, and then once everything is clean or cleaner, we're gonna pull the gas tank and figure out what exactly is going on with the carbs. Some of the early warning signs is the fact that the throttle appears to be totally stuck, and so is the clutch. It barely has half an inch of movement, which means that something down there is stuck to something else, and we're going to have to figure it out. But anyway, first things first, I'm going to get the vacuum cleaner. I'm going to vacuum out all the leaves and garbage and stuff, and then we're going to wipe her down and get going. The other thing I found was that somebody, when they dropped it, they didn't damage the plastics very much, but they broke the master cylinder. Like the actual master cylinder rod doesn't come out anymore. They actually jammed it all the way through. So we're going to need to find a new master cylinder for sure. This bike actually only has about 6,000 miles on it because I got the cluster light up and everything seems to be okay on the electronics. So hopefully this will be another quick clean the carb type job, you know, regular maintenance, oil change, blah, 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 and down the road we go. Fortunately, the gas tank has a petcock on it, which works, and this came off easy peasy. So basically you have the fuel line, there you go, lots of dirty fuel. You have this plug right here, which I believe goes to the fuel, it goes to the fuel tank, which means it's a fuel level sensor. There's these 2 vacuum drain lines down here. But now that we're here, we can see that the throttle bodies appear to be stuck closed. And if I take a long screwdriver and look down there, you can see that the throttle bodies are closed. So we're definitely going to have to take the carburetors off. I'm going to order a new fuel filter as well. Hopefully the fuel pump works. We're going to unplug it and check it here in a second. But it doesn't look too bad so far. So there's the entire fuel pump assembly. I just bench tested it on the battery, and it works just fine. So we're going to get a new fuel filter, but the rest of these lines look pretty good. I might replace a few of them. I have plenty of 3/8 fuel line. But we're going to keep the fuel pump on this bike. So the next step is to figure out how exactly to remove these carburetors. So we got this dust shield thing off. I found out that this thing down here actually does control, if you follow the wires, they go down to it's called an X-up valve, opens, closes the exhaust. Once I get this thing capable of firing, we'll see if it even fucking works or not. If it doesn't work, I'll have to take the headers off and just weld on a plate. So this right here has the coils mounted to it, and we pulled the dust shield back, and now these these carburetors are just sitting here. This is some sort of emissions bullshit because it's a trap for extra gas. So sometimes you can get lucky. The interesting thing is this is still stuck, and I mean I can see it trying to move. But it looks like the actual butterflies are jammed or maybe just stuck together with grease and time. I still can't see where... there's the choke cable. It also appears to be just jammed. The cable itself appears to work just fine. So hopefully it's just a matter of getting these things out and cleaning them. I gotta figure out how to get to those lower grommets to basically loosen them in order to pull the carburetors out. In the end, brute strength prevailed over tact, and my carburetors came out. Sort of. Not quite removed the throttle yet. A few things to keep in mind. Everybody always forgets, including me, forgets to unbolt the idle adjuster. If you're pulling up on your carbs and the carbs seem to be free, but they're not quite lifting away, don't just yank. It's the idle adjuster. You need to remove it. And this one comes out like a nice little fork assembly. So you don't have to actually unbolt it like I did. You can probably just pop it out. So now I gotta get the throttle out, and then we can get these carbs on the bench and start making some real progress. So a bit of a first. I have never had to remove or fix the choke rail, but this one is bent. And believe it or not, it wasn't bent by me. And as you can see, the pins that control the choke on each of the carbs they must be seized, because some of them aren't even moving. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to just very gently, I mean, I can bend this back without much of an issue. That's not the problem. The problem is that these pins should be moving smoothly, and they're not moving at all in any direction. Well, that one, okay, never mind, I lied. So that one seems to be okay. So if we grab these with a pair of pliers, this outside one moves like it should. That one is frozen. This one moves more or less like it should. And this one, once I got it moving a little bit, moves okay. So probably the problem was that this one got frozen and I just broke it. Okay. So that's, I guess, going to stay frozen. And we're just going to have choke on 3 of the carburetors, I guess. So here's the other thing. This is moving, but none of this is moving. Well, I mean, first things first is we're going to get some brake cleaner, and we're going to try to clean this up. We're going to take out open up all the bowls and clean them and write down what we got in all of our carbs like we always do, and then kind of go from there, I guess. Well, after spraying almost a can of brake cleaner in and around all of these fittings, they're finally starting to open, but they're still really stiff and really slow at smacking back. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually spray PB Blaster into all of these joints and crevices. And PB Blaster is actually a penetrating oil, and this is exactly what it's good for. So we will let it eat and dissolve all of the nasty shit that happens to be in all of these little joints. But for now, we're going to say that carburetor 1 is the one with the TPS on it. And we're going to go ahead and take this float bowl off and see what's going on under there. And remember, some people like to do all 4 carburetors at once. I've learned my lesson. A lot of times carburetors can have different jets and stuff in them, and it's just always easier if you just do them one at a time. And as you can see, that is just full of old oil, and right now there's so many fumes right now that my whole face is burning just standing over all this shit. I really need to get around to building a parts washer. So in here, standard type stuff, you have your floats, which are quite old, and that appears glued together. By the way, this is all covered by like a very sticky varnish, which means that this was ethanol-free gas, but it's been sitting for a long time, much more than a year, as it were. And if you want to do pilot screw adjustment, you can do this totally stock. See right in there. You have to drill that out, and behind that is the adjustment for the fuel and air. But yeah, these are really gummed up, and I don't know that any amount of soaking is going to make much of a difference on these carbs. So I think I'm going to call it a night before I die of these noxious fumes. And go to some reading on the internet. So after kind of going back and forth on what I wanted to do here and Googling, it pisses me off because nobody makes a complete kit for these, and so just the rubber pieces, the O-rings and
the fuel neck and stuff like that, just on their own are $30 per carburetor, or like $24 per carburetor, and that doesn't even include the jets. So I'm taking all the jets out, writing them down. I'm breaking my rule about not taking all these carbs apart at once, because what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to let them sit overnight in Chem Dip, which is carburetor and parts cleaner. Wonderful stuff. And if this stuff can save all of this, then we might be in business. If not, I'm going to start looking at other rebuilt carburetors, but they're $250, $300, and I don't want to spend that kind of money. The other positive news is my chemical regime of PB Blaster and brake clean seems to have done the job. We have full play in our butterflies. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through here now and I'm going to pull out. Alright, so here we are. We're going to take the top cover off so we can withdraw the needle, and as always there's going to be 2 screws, there's going to be a spring, then there's going to be this little vacuum sock, and we have to kind of force that out because all of this is sticky too. And if you look straight down there, I don't know if the camera can quite catch that, but the inside of that barrel is all just fucking nasty. Everything on these carburetors is just disgusting. I mean, look at that needle. Like, that's not going to work. So, reach in there, and we're going to need some... We got all of our regular stuff already in there. So there we go. There's that. There's that. And the problem here is we also have to keep track of all of this stuff. And the easiest way to keep track of all of this little stuff is to throw it right in there. So there goes our little spring. There's our little holder. This is actually so sticky and so nasty I can't even get it off. That's how bad it is. We're going to slide a little plastic piece off because that'll get destroyed. There's this little washer that'll also go in there because it doesn't need. Now these actually have a clip in them, but it's only one, so you can't change it because it's for emissions. And we'll put the spring right there. And now all we have to do is pull out the other 3, drop the needles in the nasty bucket, and just let the fluid do its thing. So after about 24 hours in the jug of death, this is what everything looks like, and you can see it's all nice and clean and shiny. So I'm going to be able to order, hopefully, rebuild kits and rebuild these carburetors. Now, most of this stuff was fairly straightforward. It just kind of soaked itself clean, then a little compressed air helped. But for these, the pilot jets, they're the hardest. And what I did is you make a little tool, you get some fine thread, use this end to burrow in there and dig out as much dirt as possible. And then you thread this through, and then once you break through, compressed air takes care of the rest. But it's very important so that you can actually see daylight through these pilot jets. Otherwise, they're just not going to work. So these are all nice and clean. I'm going to have to order new gaskets, and I'm going to have to figure out what we're going to do about cleaning the inside of these carburetors, if we're going to do that at all. Well, after going back and forth a whole bunch of times, it looks like the carburetors are basically just a carb kit each away from coming back together. So I'm going to hopefully order those this week and get this all back together, and we'll take care of the rest of the bike along with ordering all the other parts. So now that our K&N unit has come in, while I'm still waiting for the rest of the parts, we're going to go ahead and take care of this valve cover. Apparently at some point it started leaking, and they tried to fix that by using this. This is flat cork gasket maker. Old school Americana guys would cut out oil pan gaskets out of this stuff, and it would work just fine in 1965. I don't know who the retard was that thought it would work on a motorcycle as a gasket, but we're going to actually pull these bolts out real quick, pull the cover off, make sure everything on the underside is undamaged. We're going to clean it up, a little bit of RTV, and we'll be good to go. But first we got to drain off the oil and replace the oil filter while we're at it. So there you can see all of our oil is draining out, and now we're going to get this oil filter off. You can see the oil was totally clean and clear. Obviously they put in the gasket and thought it had worked and couldn't get it started, and so fresh clean oil set in there. And right there you can see our little exhaust flap thingy. So if worst comes to worst, I can't get it to work, then I'll just take this thing off right here and then weld a plate on there and forget about it. Now, a good way to get an oil filter off is using a pair of large channel locks. Just get it started and make sure you're going in the right direction, because that also helps. Like the right direction. There we go. And you can tell you're going in the right direction because it actually gets easier the further you go. And like every other sports bike ever, there's no way of doing this without getting the oil all over the exhaust. Now that we got all the bolts out, we can just pry this off. And remember, this is the magneto cover, so there is going to be some resistance. I'm sorry, this is not the magneto cover. This is flywheel cover, so there was no resistance. Thankfully, you can see where it was leaking at the bottom of this stupid fucking gasket. So what we're going to do is we're going to do our best to clean up this gasket surface on every side, and then we're just going to RTV it. Now, obviously you can buy a paper gasket, the right paper gasket, but there's no reason not to RTV a connection like this. But what you certainly don't want to do is you certainly don't want to use cork. I mean, this is definitely a first. Never seen somebody who used cork for something like this. Well, after what seemed like 20 minutes of straight scraping, I got a nice smooth gasket surface to mate with. And now we're going to just use standard ultra black RTV. And we're going to put down a nice semi-thick layer, just like that. Because what you're really looking for is you don't want there to be any of this stuff inside the engine. So you're looking that when you squeeze this shut and tighten it down with the bolts, you should get a very, very thin, smooth bead of it that just oozes out all around the edges, and you want it to be nice and symmetrical. So basically you want an even amount of RTV everywhere around the gasketing surface. And I've talked about it before. There are some people who are like, oh my god, you have to use paper gaskets for everything. No, you really don't. There's nothing wrong with RTV. It's not going to kill your engine, blah, 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 blah. I mean, you definitely don't want to put so much on that there's just goops of it floating around in your oil. But if you follow the instructions that I'm giving you and the ones that are on the actual like little tube of RTV, and you apply a nice thin layer like this, you're going to be just fine. The other important key is you want to make sure that before you actually put this on, you go onto the engine side as well. And you don't need to put RTV on the engine side. If you put a proper amount on this side, you don't need to double up. But what you do need to do is make sure this is all has a nice even coat. An RTV takes like a solid 45 minutes or so to set. So you can take your time and make sure it's all nice and thin with your finger. And then you want to have a paper towel ready, because this shit does not want to come off. And what you want to do is you want to take a paper towel, make sure you go back here and wipe down all of the oil that's going to have gathered down here. You want all of the gasket surface to be absolutely immaculate before you put the cover back on. And then once you're in, you just thread all of the bolts back in. You want to go in a crisscross pattern when you do this. Oops. And just like that, you got the whole thing seated up. And what you want to do is you want to run your finger like that. And you can see just a very, very tiny bit squeezed out on my finger. Now, we're going to let it cure. I normally give it 45 minutes at least. But since we're not anywhere near doing anything else on this motor, I'm going to call it a night. Alright, so here we are with our R1 carburetors again. And here are the K&L kits. 22 bucks a piece for one fucking gasket and this guy. So we're going to do that. We're also going to drill out these fuel screws and replace them. But first, before we do all that, I'm going to just go through and clean everything out one more time because it's been sitting a few days. And then we'll get to work. I like to reassemble the tops first, and if you remember, this big donut looking thing goes on from the bottom of the needle and needs to sit flush up against the clip. This little guy goes on top. The spring goes on top of that. Then this seats right on top of that and gets put straight down here. And what I like to do is I put my finger right there so I can just walk it down there slowly. And I have kind of thick fingers, so it's a little harder for me. And if you do shoot, you can use some needle nose pliers to just guide it all the way in like we guided it out. Then as soon as you have that, you just slip this right back in. Make sure that this little guide lines up like that. I always go ahead and just seat the rubber back in so it's back where it's supposed to go. You can drop the return spring. Make sure it's sitting on this. And this should sit flush. You should be able to hold like that with your finger. There should be no resistance, no imbalance, anything. If there is, you're pinching the rubber and you need to immediately let go. Do not tighten one of these down if you don't think that you're totally flush. So then you just screw this down and tighten it down by hand. It doesn't need to be super tight. Just needs to hold it in place. The vacuum seal does the rest. So now I'm going to do the other ones, and then we can move to the bottom and open up our kits. So now we're ready to move on to the underside of these carburetors. And here's our little kit. So we have our float bolt gasket. We have the spring, the washer, and the little O-ring for the fuel adjustment screw. And we'll have to drill this out and get in there in a minute. And then you have this, which we got to replace first before we move on. And this is our fuel control. So what you're going to want to do is you want to take this guy, you want to just line it up with this hole like that, and then just push it in until it sits basically flush. Take one of our little tiny screws, preferably on a screwdriver. Screw that bad boy in. And you might hear it move a little bit, and that's just totally fine. That's that O-ring seating. And then we got to put in all the rest of the various pieces. We got to put this guy in, and I'll have to get some tools here in a second. So the first step is to put the main jet holder in, and it uses an 8mm, and you just want to snug that in there like that. Then you want to double check that your main is the right main. On this bike, they're all 130 mains. So we're just going to thread that in, and you always want to thread this in by hand. Then you want to use a broad flathead screwdriver and just give it like that. You're done. Now one of these pilot jets, these are all 15 pilots. We just want to double check it's clean against the light again. We drop it down the little pilot jet hole. And then we use a slightly thinner screwdriver, like that. So now the bottom of our carburetor is starting to come together. We're going to grab one of our floats. We're going to put this on, and the way this sits is you want those little humps to go forward so it hangs off like that. I hope the camera gets that. Then you just want to guide it in. Drop it in like that. And then you want to take one of these rods that we pulled out earlier and put it back in its spot like that. So now what you want to see is you want to see that if I took a screwdriver under here and I lift the float, you can see right in there it's moving up and down, which is good because that means that it's letting in gas and then sealing. So that's it for, so next we want to put in this little O-ring. Oops. And this only fits a very specific way. It's got these little shoulder steps on it, and it's got this little guide right there. So you want to just loosely form fit it so that the O-ring is sitting. The nice thing about these K&L kits is they always fit properly, unlike the Moose Racing ones and some of the other junkier kits. But they do tend to wander a little bit if the grooves aren't very deep. So it can be a bit of a hassle to get them in. This looks absolutely brand new because it's been sealed. So I'm actually not even going to bother drilling out the rest of these. 1/2, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3. And then we're just going to leave the rest of them sealed up. There's no reason to drill them out for this. And so now we can just do the rest of the carbs the same way and get them back on the bike. Now that the carburetors are done, the next step in the food chain is the fuel pump and filter. So we got a brand new OEM filter, and replacing this is pretty straightforward. You just get a pair of big old pliers and work the two fuel lines loose like that, and then like that. Occasionally you have to grab it and break that connection right there. It's been a long time since anybody took this apart, probably at the factory when it was put together. So then you just work this guy out, and it's going to fight you every step of the way because things like this always do. Yep, they flow in the same direction, which is good. So we're going to just pop this bitch back in here. That goes right there. Our pliers let us relock. It goes on there. Goes like that. And just like that, we are ready to put this all on the bike. So there you go. The carbs aren't fully in yet, but I got the throttle cables and the choke in, so now we can choke it and it works. And we can crank the throttles and you can see them opening and closing, all the butterflies. And they snap shut on their own, which is good. So we're going to tighten this down. The reason I didn't show you guys how to run the cables is because it's a lot of swearing from my part. It's one of my least favorite things to do. Basically, you just got to get them back down the way the factory was. There's no real excuses there. Just get it done. Then we're going to get something to hold it steady, and then we're going to hammer these carbs back into their sockets. We're going to fill them up with a little bit of gasoline and see where we're at. Alright, well, we got our makeshift gas tank going to our fuel pump. Come on. Fill up with gasoline. There we go. So now we can kind of just shove this in here. If we turn on the key, there goes the fuel pump. So now we're going to give it a nice healthy squirt of starter fluid. And it also helps if we actually choke the thing. Boy, that sounds pretty healthy.